Welcome everyone to our question and answer Zoom for Finding Sally, one of our documentary features here at SpIFF 2022. And I'm just going to get started with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded land of the Spokane people, and that these lands were once the major trading center for the Spokanes as they shared this place and welcomed other area tribes through their relations, history, trade, and ceremony. We also want to acknowledge that the land holds the spirit of the place through its knowledge, culture, and all the original peoples since time immemorial. As we take a moment to consider the impacts of colonization, may we also acknowledge the strengths and resiliency of the Spokanes and their relatives. As we work together, making decisions that benefit all, may we do so as one heart, one mind, and one spirit. We are grateful to be on the shared lands of the Spokane people and ask for the support of their ancestors and all relations. We ask that you recognize these injustices that forever change the lives of the Spokane people and all their relatives. We agree to work together to stop all acts of continued injustices toward Native Americans and all our relatives. It is time for reconciliation. We must act upon the truths and take actions that will create restorative justice for all people. And we want to thank Professor Margot Hill from Eastern Washington University for creating our land acknowledgement. And we also want to thank EW and STCU for being our presenting sponsors this year. And I would like to introduce Tamara Mariam Dawit, who is the director of Finding Sally.
Thank you so much for making time to talk. And it was so beautiful and interesting actually to hear the land acknowledgement, because I'm joining you from Canada and it's something we do hear a lot, but I don't always hear it when I join events in the US. So I was really pleased to hear that.
Yeah, I definitely don't always hear it here in the United States at events online or in person either, but we are so lucky to have Professor Hill, who is a member of the Spokane tribe. And she's been coming to SpIFF for years. She's a good friend to us. So thank you so much. I want to say thank you. It's an honor to speak with you about this film, which I found to be so touching. I feel like a lot of documentaries become personal to the filmmakers, but obviously this documentary started personal for you. You know, it was your story. What do you think that filmmaking came to you because you had stories to tell, or did you find stories and find that film was the right medium to tell your stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was a teenager or younger, I knew I wanted to tell stories, but I just assumed, or I thought, well, I'll write books, because that was really the main medium that I consumed. And then, you know, my career over the past 20 plus years, I've always been telling stories. It's just continually taken different art forms. I've worked in theater, I've worked in international development, doing radio production and youth media and communications work. I worked in the music industry. And I think it was really more so the last 10 years that I started to want to tell stories from my family's experience or about being Ethiopian and Eritrean. And it was just filmmaking that was the best platform to do that, to make sure that that content and those stories would reach wider audiences.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like that's also a really good way to have maybe a more emotional like connection to people who might not know. And I guess I probably also should have said, if you want to introduce yourself or the film at all, I just jump right into a question. But I guess I've been sitting with this for a couple of days. I decided I needed to like read through the Wikipedia article on Ethiopia and then go from there to find other like bits of history, because you include so much history of Ethiopia and how your family, especially Sally, how she fit into that history. What was it like to tell both the story of, because I did feel like your film is a great introduction for people who might not know that much about Ethiopian history. What was it like to tell the story about your family and Ethiopia, like intertwining them?
Yeah, I mean, I've known for maybe 15 or 20 years that I wanted to do something about the Ethiopian Revolution. I found it was really interesting and wasn't that well documented, especially it's much more documented in the last couple of years, but I didn't know what form that was going to take. And it was sort of the piece of my family history that was missing. My family is all mostly women, and they're all always telling stories, but they talk a lot about what happened in the 1950s, in the 60s, and then kind of the 70s and the 80s are like this black hole. And I didn't really notice that until I was an adult, to start to wonder, like, they talk about their childhood and then they talk about the last 10 or 15 years, but there's this period that's missing. And I think that's really what drew me into trying to find information on Ethiopia in that period from other sources. And then it was really, you know, like I said in the film, finding out I had this aunt that I knew nothing about. It's literally this photo that's behind me here. And then that's what made me realize, okay, these things I've been reading about the revolution and the mass killings, there's a connection in my own family. And that was really the start to want to dig more, to know for myself. And then also really the realization that if I don't know about this, a lot of other people internationally and a lot of younger Ethiopians and Eritreans don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that speaks so much to my experience of your wonderful film, because I think Americans often don't look outside their little bubble anyway, but yeah, it's like it's interesting to see such a personal view of history through your eyes, through this story. When I also found this film to be such a good, complex way to tell this story in a relatively, short span of time. But did you think about genre when you were making this film? Because I found it to be, it starts off as like, I'm learning about your family, so it's like a family storytelling, but then it also turns into almost like political thriller, and then tragedy, but then people coming together at the end, when your aunts come together and they get to go up north to the village, and into the grave marker. What if anything did genre?
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I did not anticipate putting myself into the film. That was something that really happened much further into production.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm not in the film that much, because half of the film I shot without thinking about that. And that was, I think it's a decision that I wasn't comfortable with, but it served the film. It made the film much more relatable. It was something that was really important to the broadcaster in Canada, to give it more Canadian content and to make it relatable to Canadian audiences by following the journey of an Ethiopian Canadian. So that was, I think, the big thing that changed. I think in terms of the other approaches to the storytelling, we didn't know what they were going to be when we started, because we didn't know what journeys we would have with my aunts in terms of following them and observational filmmaking. Like the fact that I followed my aunt Kibra back to this house where she was imprisoned, that's not something we had planned for or anticipated. I didn't know how much archive we were going to find, and then I didn't know how much archive we could afford. So I think it's all of those things that you hope for the best, and then you work with what you get.
Yeah. Speaking of the archive footage, I was just wondering, because you have so much interesting archive footage, but then also the photographs. They're beautiful, a lot of black and white, beautiful photographs. And I was just wondering, were all of the photos like from family albums, or were they also archive photos? Where did you start with your footage and your photos?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky in one sense that because my grandfather was an ambassador, there were a lot of like official embassy photos, and my family had cameras, so there's hundreds and hundreds of photos of my father as a child and as a teenager, and all of my aunts, and all those photos sort of carried up until the revolution. And around after 1974, I think I have one photo of Sally and a few random photos of other people. And then it kind of picks up again in the 80s as some of the family ended up in the US and Canada. So that, in that sense, it was lucky. Part of the reason why there's sort of recreated footage that we've tried to make look like archives of Sally in the last half of the film is once she went underground, there was no footage of her.
Yeah.
And there was no really other footage I could even buy of someone else to do with the underground movement.
And that makes sense. I would imagine that it'd be unbelievably unsafe to allow someone to take photos or do video.
Yeah, the only photo we have from that is strangely of her funeral.
Mm.
And I actually don't know who took that photo, but it was brought to us so that the family could see that, you know, how many people came to her funeral.
Yeah. And that photo seemed like it was taken from like a good distance. It's not like you can see faces or anything, which is probably a good way to protect anyone who was close to her, who wanted to grieve her without, you know, naming themselves as someone to target. That's really interesting. I guess I just found all of the photos and the footage unbelievable. And I noticed that you had the recreations, which I understood as like, obviously you might, you know, you're not going to have, especially when she was in the north and she was far from city centers, up in the mountains. Was it difficult to make that recreation footage, and maybe not even just from like a filmmaking standpoint, but was it like emotionally difficult to get in the headspace to direct a recreation?
I think what was difficult was I was the person playing Sally, which many people don't recognize, and it wasn't that, again, was not my intention. It was that we spent a lot of time trying to cast someone that was an actress or an aspiring actress, and we just couldn't find anyone that looked like her. I mean, she wasn't, she was a little bit plump. And a lot of the actresses we were getting from casting agencies or looking for in university theater programs were just too slender, or had dyed their hair blonde, or like they just had completely like taken off most of their eyebrows. So it was just going to be too much work. And I think it was the cameraman or her sound woman who just looked at me and said, "You look like her." And if we're going to be we shot all those recreations through a mirror. So we were actually sort of shooting a reflection to give it this more distorted look. Yeah. So, I mean, most people don't realize it was me, but definitely being in the thing and trying to direct it and playing your dead relative, that was not something that was easy, and that I would not be looking to do again. But I think otherwise, like directing the recreations was really fun. We worked with the university theater department in Adigrat in northern Ethiopia, and I'm sure that was also exciting for all of the students and their teacher to be hired to be on this film set. That's
I'm sure that must have been. I would think that theater kids, especially if they don't get to do a lot of film stuff, would probably be over the moon to do anything film. And I'm going to pull from, I had a thought and then I lost it because that's how I am. Oh, you talked about mirrors. You said that, you shot through a mirror, which definitely it did. It gave like a filter quality to help the footage feel, authentic and older. But you also talked about like a metaphorical mirror of how you fell in love and got married during the film or during your time in Ethiopia. I don't know if that happened during the course of filmmaking, although you filmed your ceremony, which was really beautiful and sweet. That was a lovely part of the movie. But you talked about how that sort of mirrored your Aunt Sally's, how she finally got to come home after spending so many years away, and she fell in love and got married. So what was it like to find love and joy while also, going through the story of a really tragic family story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was unexpected, and maybe it is that you find love or you find joy or you find happiness in your life when you're open to it, but not when you go out aggressively looking for it. But I think there are parallels. I don't think they're not intentional on my part, but it's interesting because it enabled me to try and think more about what was Sally going through, what was she thinking about. And I really, grew up away from most of my aunts. and didn't really know them as an adult. So I think that as much as this film enabled me to get to know Sally and find out what she was all about, I also got to know all of my aunts because I had to spend so much time with them in terms of the production.
Yeah, so that must have been, you know, while going through your family's historic past and the sadness there, but it must have been lovely to you know, connect deeper with your aunts too.
Yeah, and I think the whole film was like a therapy session,
Mhm.
and maybe in an unintended way, especially the trip to the north that we did in the end of production. Because there, you know, there's reasons why I didn't know about this, because my aunts were not talking about it as much as they didn't think they weren't doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
I think when there's something difficult and painful, we tend to swallow things and we keep them within, and that's what they were doing. And this film and this production was really, you know, some of them said, now I've started putting Sally's photo up in my house, or this is the first time we've all sat together and talked about her. And they started to be able to not just focus on the bad memories, but also remember the good things.
That's really beautiful. That's wonderful. Uh, I almost feel like that must have, you know, part of it is, you know, the group therapy of being able to discuss and remember all the memories instead of just trying to, you know, forget the bad ones. But that it must have been in some ways, because I know one of your aunts, was it Brutoid? She talked about how, you know, she didn't, for a while, she wanted to know what had happened. She knew that Sally had passed away, but she wanted to know what happened. And then she realized that she didn't even want to know after a while. But then you all went and filmed in the village, and was there a sense of, you know, of coming to peace a little bit by knowing what happened, learning what had happened more exactly instead of it being still mysterious? Or did that hurt more than it helped? It seems like they were able to come together and, you know, and maybe mourn together, grieve together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that was the most helpful, or the thing that brought everyone together, was actually having a grave and a grave marker, because we all had bits and pieces of different stories about what might have happened to her. But we knew that my grandmother really, really wanted there to be a gravestone. And in fact, she had sent money a decade earlier to the church and told them to build something, and who knows what happened to that money, but they didn't build anything. So we know that it was something that she had really wanted before she passed away. So I think that I didn't realize how emotional that was going to make them, and how important it was to them, really, until we were there and they were witnessing it.
It made me emotional too. So I could empathize from their point of view, sympathize with their feeling, because I would say not that many documentaries necessarily make me cry, but yours made me cry a fair amount. So I guess in talking about that and going and seeing the grave marker, was there a difference in feeling as a filmmaker? Did you have because your aunts were obviously, they knew her and they were thinking about their past and thinking about their past memories, where as every bit of information came to you, it was new. Was there, and then also as a filmmaker, sometimes filmmakers are, you know, a little bit detached from the subject, which you probably aren't completely that way, but I would think, you know, you're still through a lens. What was it like to be experiencing their past memories as new, you know, it's still the past, but it's new to you? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the parts that were the hardest to film or the hardest to watch back are the sort of observational scenes. So like the graveyard, some of the scenes with Sally's landlady in the north, and when I went with my Aunt Kibra to the place where she had been incarcerated, because I didn't know what they were going to do there. When I was taping interviews with them, because I had pre-interviewed them, I kind of had a sense of what they might say. But I think also, for me, when we were filming, because I was thinking about directing and also thinking about production stuff, it doesn't always land the same way. And I think it was more emotional for me in actually editing and watching things again and again, and being able to really be focused on what had been captured.
Yeah. You mentioned Sally's landlady, whose name I'm not sure if I know how to pronounce. It's Brewer. How do you?
Brew.
Okay. I noticed that you all were drinking. It was coffee, right? Like the drink was, and I thought, I've never seen. It makes sense that that's how like coffee could be brewed. Like roasted among like coals or at the bottom of a fire, and then ground by hand, which is what coffee grinders do. But I was just wondering what that experience must have been like. Was it? I mean, I can't imagine that it would be like a fun experience because of how emotional that day would be. But what was it like to have coffee like that?
I mean, it's fairly typical. I think almost every film I've shot in Ethiopia, or other people's films I've worked on, there's always a coffee scene, because the coffee ceremony is like the thing in Ethiopia. And as soon as you go into anyone's house, that's what they do. They make you coffee, they roast it, because that's the traditional thing to do to greet guests. I can't imagine like how much coffee we drank in production, or how much time we spent waiting, because you have to have all three, rounds of coffee. And I'm sure the producer was like, we don't have time for this. And I was like, it's rude, we have to stay. But I think that's just part of the hospitality. And I know that, she was really happy to have us there and to have us come talk to her. So she wanted to make us coffee.
Yeah, it was great. That's such an amazing detail. To have that included, and to just to be able, it was amazing too that she was able to offer a little bit of closure. She just seemed like such a pivotal moment. I was really moved by that whole scene. And then we're getting close to sort of a time frame, but I just want to make sure that if I have a question that was really important to me, that I don't miss it.
Sure.
But I guess we covered a bunch of stuff that were in my questions, just going through things. I guess what I want to know now too is there anything you want people to learn from the film? Was there, obviously you're presenting your family and your story, but was there anything that you hope people would take away?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was two different but equally important audiences I was thinking about making the film. One was, very early in thinking about this, my grandmother came and said, you have to make this film, because if you don't know about Sally and her peers and their sacrifices and how they believed in their country, other younger people in our family or in the country won't know about it, and that's a shame. So I had this clear direction from her that Ethiopians need to know about this, so I wanted to document it for that lens. And I think making a film for your community, it's the first feature film made in Canada about the Ethiopian community. That was a burden of duty of care. But then the other thing that was important, which actually came from a conversation early on with an executive from PBS in the US. She said, oh, no one's pitched me a film about Ethiopia. There's so many Ethiopian restaurants in the US, and we don't know why they're here. And that also kind of made me clue into the fact that, yes, it's not just about Ethiopians. There's so many Ethiopians in the diaspora, and many people have baggage and histories. Nearly every Ethiopian lost someone in the revolution in the 1970s. So this is an opportunity for wider audiences to start to understand Ethiopia of the past, and perhaps also have that in mind for Ethiopia of the present, because what's happening today in the country is really the repetition of the past, and somewhat out of the lack of thinking about what's happened in the past and thinking about how to learn from that and move forward.
Yeah. That's amazing. I do want to ask, I know you're working on some projects now. And I was wondering if there's anything that we should be on the lookout for that you're allowed to talk about. I know sometimes things are under wraps, but is there anything that you're allowed to share about upcoming projects?
I mean, I mostly work as a producer.
Mhm.
I do have a project that's in financing now so that we can actually start production next year, which is set in the same period.
Mhm.
And it's drama. And it's really, something I wanted to do with this Ethiopian director, because I think we need more stories to
Mhm.
reflect on this period. I think it's, like the Holocaust, the genocide in Rwanda,
Mhm.
what happened in Cambodia. Like, one film or one book is not enough. We have to look at these things and remember them from every angle.
Absolutely. It's that if we don't learn from our history and certainly remember our history, we'll be doomed to repeat it.
Yep.
So that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that that's coming. Where can everybody follow you? Is there a website or a social account? Where should they keep an eye out?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if people want more information about Finding Sally, or there's extra videos and articles, the film's website is findingsally.com or .ca. I believe it's both of them.
Mhm.
And otherwise, my website or my social media is Gobez, which is GOBEZ media.
Awesome. Thank you. I was on the Finding Sally website in the last couple of days, and there's a lot of awesome stuff. I haven't read everything, but I'm going to. And I just want to say thank you so much, Tamara, for joining us here in Eastern Washington virtually for SpIFF 2022. It's been a privilege to talk to you, and it was an honor to screen your film.
No, thank you so much, and I hope in a future year to visit you in person.
Yeah, we hope so too. Yeah, when the next one comes out, that we're able to get everybody back. Well, you have a wonderful night, and we'll see you in a couple of years, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.